Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Later, we're going to be talking about the citizen birthright, since, Trump brought it up and all. But first, a story of someone who was guilty, now innocent, some 28 years later, and the woman who dug up that story to make it all happen, Susan Greene from the Colorado Independent. Welcome.
Thanks. Hi.
All right. I want to talk about this story. Why, for the last 9 years, have you been working on this particular story? And then we'll get into it. What's the passion about trying to find this person who's been in jail, it looks like, for a crime he didn't commit for the better part of 3 decades?
Why am I interested?
Yeah, why?
I mean, nothing gets worse than this. It's like a human train wreck. It's the system. I mean, you can relate to this. You people hate the long arc.
Are we going to start with you people already?
You people,
right off the bat, you people.
You don't like the government taking away your guns and intruding into your life. How do you feel about the government taking you away and snatching you off the street when you're riding your bike with your kid and putting you away for 28 years for a crime you didn't commit?
If it wasn't me, no,
who cares?
Who cares?
Right,
No.
yeah.
Let's go back to what happened. This happened in 1987. And what did Clarence Moses L. supposedly do? So
only a couple of blocks away from this lovely studio, there was a rape in 5 Points, in the 5 Points neighborhood of Denver, of a woman who had been out drinking with a bunch of friends that night. And she was raped and also beaten up so badly that she lost use of one eye. And when the police asked her, who did this to you, she named 3 people, Elsie, Earl, and Darnell. Okay, none of those are Clarence Moses L., the guy we're here to talk about, right? She repeatedly named those people, saying she thinks one of them did it to her. And then she was hospitalized, she came out of a sleep, and she said, I think I know who did this to me. His identity came to me in a dream, and this dream is the only evidence linking Clarence to this case. She says, in a dream, she realized that he had raped her somehow, okay? And she believed that her dreams were true. And again, there was no other evidence linking her to the case. And the police never questioned Elsie, Earl, or Darnell. And so years later, 3 years ago, so Clarence went to prison. He did.
And he was arrested for this crime?
Yes.
Even though there wasn't any physical evidence?
Yes,
for this crime.
There was a lot of physical evidence. Thanks for asking. There was a rape kit, there were bed sheets, there were clothes with DNA all over them, presumably. This all happened before we even knew about DNA, right? And so Clarence is sitting in prison like everyone else in the country. He's watching O.J. Simpson, and he's watching Barry Scheck, O.J.'s attorney, try to prove, try to exonerate him through DNA. And so Clarence writes Barry Scheck along with like thousands of other prisoners in the country and says, please represent me. I have the DNA in this case. And Scheck agrees. He says, you raised $1,000 from prison and I'll take your case. This is a really compelling case. So Clarence raises $1,000 in prison. And the reason why that's interesting is, I think people who don't do time in prison assume that everyone in prison says I'm innocent, right? Well, you don't raise $1,000 from your fellow inmates only to have, if the test comes back, nailing you, like that just doesn't go super well in terms of your safety or comfort in prison, right? So everyone who's been in the prison system who knows Clarence has heard him talk and talk and talk about his innocence. So he raises $1,000, he gets 2 court orders to test the DNA, and this is in 1993, the dawn of the DNA era. He gets 2 court orders to test it. The police put the DNA, all the stuff in a box, and they mark it, do not destroy, in a magic marker. And the cops throw the box in the dumpster.
When do the cops throw it in the dumpster?
93.
93 as they see the order or before they get this order?
Well, there was a lack of communication between the district attorney's office and the police. And we know there was a lack of communication. Now, how that really led to someone in the police department taking a box that says, do not destroy, throwing it in the dumpster, I don't know.
Why wouldn't they want this evidence to be used?
Right.
It makes it seem as though the police want to cover up a guilty man who is innocent that could be exonerated by this.
Right. In fairness, I don't have any evidence that they threw it out maliciously. I suspect I go toward the same suspicions myself, but I don't have any evidence of that. I used to work at the Denver Post for a long time, and I spent a year with a partner, Miles Moffett, on a series called Trashing the Truth. And it was a national series about the loss and destruction of DNA. And so I came across Clarence's case, even though it was a national case and we were looking at hundreds of cases across the country. His case was so flagrant because the box said, "Do not destroy." And what we were looking at is this Supreme Court decision that says you have no remedy. If they toss out your stuff or if they mishandle your evidence, even in the era of DNA when it's so truth-telling and so valuable, unless you can prove they did it maliciously, like you suppose, which is an impossible legal standard to prove, you have no recourse. So basically, they threw out his stuff, and he has sat there ever since 1993.
You started this story 9 years ago. You were not working for the Colorado Independent, which is a web-based.
What's that called?
I think that's called coloradoindependent.com.
Yes.
Is that a website? I hear some people
Thanks.
go to that.
I know you do every day. We can see it.
It's like a pseudo-news kind of site. Is that right?
Let's move on.
Let's move on. All right. Even before the Independent, you were working on this at the Post. Why has it taken 9 years to get to the point we're at today, where you now have this published story, and it looks like this man is going to be exonerated? What happened?
When we were at the Post, we were working on the story, and we started our whole series, a series we spent a year on, which was quite a long time and a huge investment for the paper, with Clarence's case. And while we were working on it, I think a press release came from Mitch Morrissey, the DA's office, saying, "Hey, everyone, we've solved a cold case with DNA in Denver." And Morrissey's kind of known for doing this, solving cold cases. And he found the answer to an unsolved 1993 cold case rape of a mother and her 9-year-old daughter at knife point. And it was a guy named L.C. Jackson. And L.C. is the first man named in the victim's outcry, L.C. Jackson. He's the person she had been partying with that night. And so we went to Mitch Morrissey and said, "Why won't you reinvestigate this case? You know, he was never questioned, and it really looks like Clarence is innocent." And Morrissey kept saying, "She never named him in his outcry." And we showed him all the papers from the preliminary hearing and the police report, even though his office had them. And he just kept saying, including in front of the legislature, there's no connection with L.C. Jackson. He refused to see it, even though they knew, because they won the trial against him and got a life sentence against him, 2 life sentences.
Against Clarence Moses L.
No, against L.C. Jackson
for
this
crime.
other case that happened only really blocks away from the Clarence Moses L. case. He wouldn't reopen the Clarence Moses L. case, okay? So what happened, to answer your question years later, is Clarence doesn't know L.C. Jackson, right? They don't know. He gets a letter from L.C. saying, you know, "Brother, Clarence, send your lawyers. It's time to bring to light what was done in the darkness."
So let me see if I get this right. The name that the victim used at the very beginning gets convicted and is put away for 2 life sentences. He's behind bars. He's got nothing more to lose. And there's no more DNA. The whole evidence in the do not disturb box, it's gone. And the
Do not destroy.
Do not destroy.
You've got to stop thinking about cheap motels, okay?
I have my experiences. That's what I base everything on. And if not for the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator coming out with a conviction, or excuse me, a confession, none of this would happen. So it was the first guy who tells Clarence, "Wait a second, no, I did it." Is that basically what happened? He wrote a letter? He
wrote a letter, and then a bunch of people have interviewed him. And fast forward to about a month ago, he was in court, in Denver District Court, testifying that he attacked that same victim in the same place at the exact same time and hit her hard the same night of the attack. He's confessing. And what's interesting is that, you know, we know that prosecutors are kind of loath to concede or to entertain the prospect that maybe they messed up in a conviction or they got the wrong person. But Mitch Morrissey's taken this case to a new level. I mean, he tried to keep L.C. Jackson from testifying. He tried to block blood evidence that shows it's highly more likely, according to a DU blood expert, forensic, well-respected blood expert, that it's L.C. Jackson that was his DNA, his semen at the crime, and not Clarence's case. They did everything they could to try to stop or block new evidence from coming out in court. But it did anyway, and now we're waiting for a judge to decide whether to overturn the conviction.
Again, this is a story you've been working on for 9 years, so this is a high point for you. It's got to be a higher point for Clarence Moses L., who's looking at getting out of prison after 28 years for a crime it looks like he didn't commit. What has to happen for that to take place?
Well, the judge would have to rule that, yes, in fact, there's enough evidence that had it been presented at the original trial, it would have garnered enough reasonable doubt that it wouldn't have resulted in conviction. Then, you know, Morrissey's office, I guess, could possibly appeal it. Clarence would be let out, presumably, on some sort of bond while they tried to re-prosecute him. But what's interesting is, if they brought it back to trial, they didn't bring the victim in the case, who has major credibility problems, including the fact that the day before she was attacked, had said publicly in front of a lot of people to Clarence's wife, "I'm going to get back at you," because their sons had been fighting in the housing project, right? She did not testify. She was not called to the stand during this hearing the other day, right? So she's not the most credible witness. I think it would be very hard, given all the new evidence in the case, including a confession by L.C. Jackson, the first guy named, to get another conviction. And so Clarence, I guess, could be retried, but presumably he would go free. And to answer your question, is this a high point? It's actually kind of disturbing to see. I mean, what does it take for this man? He wins a court order, they throw out his evidence. He gets a confession like 3 years ago. It takes 3 years to bring it to trial. And you're watching your elected DA with our tax dollars. And if you don't care about this for moral reasons, you might care about this for tax dollars or whatever legal settlement Clarence might get against the city someday. I think it's really disturbing to watch the city try to stonewall what looks like the truth in this case. So I wouldn't call it a high point. I would call it as disturbing as it's been for the last 9 years. And I feel for the guy, man. 28 years.
Last question. After looking at this, working on it for 9 years, what systematic change needs to happen in Denver to protect from this happening again? I mean, because this type of thing can't happen. People make mistakes, cops make mistakes, prosecutors make mistakes, good people make mistakes. What needs to change?
We need a DA who listens to people. I mean, we need a DA who, you know, there's a personality issue going on with Mitch in this case. I mean, there are DAs, it does happen, there have been hundreds of innocence cases in this country where, although generally DAs do try to fight them, sometimes they say, great, there's new evidence, you know, maybe we got it wrong. We want to make sure, you know, when we're using DNA, for example, to solve all these cold cases, that we also acknowledge that DNA can also expose wrongful convictions. So what we need is a new DA.
Beyond a new DA, which is going to happen at some point,
we will.
Is there something systematic that needs to change? I mean, other than don't throw away boxes of evidence that say don't throw away this box.
Number one, if you misuse or throw out potentially exculpatory evidence in a case, you should give someone a remedy, meaning a new trial. You should be able to retry the case, okay, if you throw out the most vital, important evidence in the case. Number two, and I think there have been improvements in Denver's system since '93 when they threw out the system, but we need to be really careful and respectful of these tiny bits of biological evidence that are so truth-telling, right? And number three, I think, you know, we spend so many millions of dollars on Mitch Morrissey's cold case unit trying to solve these cold cases. I think there needs to be some recognition that sometimes the DAs screw up, and I think there should be public pressure brought to bear on, you know, why not let the chips fall where they may? And I think if more people took an interest in that, there'd be more openness to the new evidence.
People want to get the full story, they want to read about it, they go to coloradoindependent.com. That work?
That works.
See? That's a pretty good. A great piece. You should be proud of it, even though it's a sad subject. Stay tuned.